Welcome to Personal Injury Marketing Minute.
Welcome to the Personal Injury Marketing Minute, where we quickly cover the hot topics in the legal marketing world. I'm your host, Lindsey Busfield, the Vice President and Partner over at Optimize My Firm. Today, I'm joined by Brittnie Panetta, an attorney at Matthews & Associates. Brittnie works on complex civil litigation cases involving mass torts, product liability, wildfire claims, and other cases where individuals are taking on some of the largest corporations in the country. Today, we're talking about access to justice, specifically why many firms decline certain types of cases and why some lawyers still choose to take them anyway. Thank you so much for joining us, Brittnie. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your practice.
Of course. I'm happy to be back on, Lindsey, and have some more conversations with you. But right now, I think my priority and what we've been working on, or I've been focusing on, is just, pretty much what you said. I'm all over the place with different things, whether it's wildfire litigation, pharmaceuticals, still wrapping up some pesticide exposure, and really taking on the whole gambit, which is always a fun time. You see a lot of different people, a lot of different faces, and help a lot in just the overall system. So.
Yep, never a dull moment there. And you take on so many different types of cases, and especially cases that not everybody is willing to take on. And so in your practice and your experience, what types of cases tend to be the hardest for injured people to find representation for?
Ooh, that's a great complex question, of course, right? What we deal with a lot. I would say what people don't see, I guess what I'd start with is, yes, we take on a lot of cases, but there's also a lot of things that we try and that don't develop, which is the other side of this, both a blessing and a curse. Like I said, right now, we have a lot of pharmaceutical situations that we're representing as well as just overall exposures to the mass. And then there's things that we've tried to take on that haven't led to that much of an ability to forge forward with, unfortunately. But with that being said, I think another area that we've looked into and that's very unfortunately large in California is abuse cases. And that varies from different institutions to also different companies. We've seen Uber, Lyft, rideshare apps. We've seen what's happening down in Los Angeles with different institutions, both government and not. And that's been a big thing in the last couple of years. And luckily, not only is it about just attorneys taking on those cases, it's about some great laws that were passed and assembly bills that gave us a future with extended revivals of statutes of limitations that we didn't think that we can get. And then that's been a nice support system to have right now.
That's fantastic. And it's great that you guys are working towards that change and creating an environment where that change is really necessary and leveraging the good that is coming out of that. And clearly, as you have new technologies emerge and, I know Uber isn't new anymore, but, within the past 20 years, it's definitely gained in popularity. And there is that need to really advocate for victims of abuse when it comes to those companies. And as we're moving forward with autonomous vehicles and so many different rapidly changing technologies that are going to be impacting the public, it is so important to be at the forefront of, that advocacy for people, especially throughout California. And so clearly you take on cases that are complex and you take on a variety of different cases. How does your firm vet what types of cases you're willing to take on?
Sure. It's a great question. And I always say it's an ever-changing answer. Just because so many cases are similar, but they're also very different and complex in their own ways. So what we'll usually do is we set our criteria before we even reach out to clients. And we'll have a first run through of who we're able to help and getting that information with them with the criteria we've set. We do additional questionnaires. And obviously you learn from that process of what is missing and what helps. So within that, we obviously have to confirm injuries for whatever that may be, whether it's pharmaceutical, that's also including usage, making sure we have the backup to push something forward, because I like to be very upfront and honest with the people that I'm working with. And if I see potential issues in the beginning, those are something that I like to address and make sure that they have a role in this litigation just as much as we do as attorneys, because at the end of the day, this is for them. And making sure that they are heard and seen in this process is just as important as winning the case for them.
Absolutely. And it is having that access to justice that makes a huge difference in their lives, because you are willing to take on cases that not everybody is willing to do so. What are some of the things that hold other attorneys back, and why is it that you have chosen to push forward with these types of cases?
I think when it really comes down to it, it's resources, whatever that may look like, right? It's resources in terms of staff, of location of where the firm's at. It's resources in terms of funds, because these do need that large influx of cash from the beginning that you're supporting this case with, which a lot of people don't understand, especially in a contingency fee world. People don't realize what the upfront costs are. And for some firms, that's just not something that they can do. So making sure that you have the resources both in staff and in finances is unfortunately part of this game. Right? Where other places that have just as much of a developed system, legal system, they have the resources within their systems to provide attorneys in the civil litigation world. Whereas that's not a right here in our country, which, we look at everything that we do have and the opportunities that we do have and the support we do have within the legal system and even our Constitution. But for the civil side, that's not something that's really there. So you have to rely on attorneys and different firms that can provide that. And at the end of the day, I think the biggest factor in that is resources.
Right. And so as you think about the resources at your firm, what are some of the most important ones that you guys have at your disposal? And how do you make sure that you constantly have the right people, the right funds coming in, and keep all of that balance so that you can take on these more complex cases that are going to take a long time to work through?
I'm happy to say that's above my pay grade.
Yes.
And things that I don't have to worry about on the day to day. I have great support within our firm, and I'm lucky to say that I don't have to worry about the day to day on that aspect. But I think it does need the attorneys kind of within a well-placed geographic location, right? I think firms that have different attorneys that are qualified to practice in different states across the country leads to a great resource, right? Because a lot of these cases you'll see end up being filed in different counties and different states and different jurisdictions. And sometimes that means that they also end up in the federal system and in a consolidated proceeding. So being able to have that resource and have knowledgeable people that provide the different input across the country to support the case's push is very helpful. From the financial sides, obviously, it is part of a game that you have to balance everything there, and that's why I think being able to have the finances to support smaller campaigns and to looking into cases and really be able to vet that from the beginning, that helps push kind of the whole docket forward. Because if something is promising there, and unfortunately that is part of this as well, is there has to be merit behind every case. And sometimes that's a time consideration. And sometimes, in the legal world, we use the term ripe for litigation, and it's not ripe. And that's a little bit unfortunate. But as you mentioned with kind of Uber, is it's not a new technology, for instance. It's not. We've had these for quite some time. However, both the problems within that system take time to see, and then the justice system also has to come in and be able to support that, which also includes the time frame of legislation coming in and making sure we have the avenues. So they always say that the hands of justice move slowly, and it's just another example. So being able to maintain resources both in attorneys and finances over the long haul is key, and that's what you need the firm to kind of back you on.
Right. And all of that comes with intentional planning and clearly intentional networking, intentional financial planning, and building those bridges to be able to have access to those resources for the long term is the only way that you're going to be able to sustain these really complex long-term cases. And speaking of these cases being, particularly complex, what sort of challenges do you face as you are navigating those with your clients and communicating along the way so that they not only have access to the justice, but also have access to understanding of how this process is working as they're going through the case?
That's something that I pride myself in specifically, especially depends on the case. I guess I'll start with that. For cases where I had pesticide exposure, that was a huge part of that was a low income community and people who have never either worked with the legal system or viewed the legal system as always against them. So for me, my biggest kind of goal was having them understand what it means for them and making sure that they felt comfortable within that system. And I think because so many of these things are sensitive topics, right? There's no injury that doesn't leave you feeling some sort of way. You really have to manage personalities and understandings, and it goes back to just making sure that your client is part of the situation and not just informed after the fact. So I make sure that our team fields kind of all the questions. If they want to talk with an attorney, it's not something that, I'm just ethically required to do. It's something I want to do. And then proceed to update them on a periodic basis to make sure that they understand where the situation is currently at. Because as you know, as I mentioned, these things may take years to resolve. And that's hard. It's hard for anyone to really watch this and feel like there's no justice in the short term because you have to wait long terms to see that realize. And that's probably the biggest thing I see is at the end of the day, these cases are for them. Obviously the system wouldn't exist without attorneys and it's what we're here to do, but it's for them.
Yeah. And clearly it's for their well-being long term. And as you and I had talked about before jumping on the podcast, yeah, there are some clients that are in a position where they have to take that quick payout. And there are others that can hold on a little bit longer. And so regardless, there is going to be an enormous impact, especially for those who hang on a little bit longer and have that time to spend. So when they see that success. And so being able to stay dedicated focused for years on end, what motivates lawyers to be able to take these types of cases and really work the process and keep enthused and engaged for several years going on?
I think it's those wins at the end. It's the clients who never thought that they had a chance, who never realized that there was support out there was justice to be had, and that are appreciative. It's for me, that's what moves me. Obviously, any client I want a successful story for, but the ones that really show you the life-changing difference that it made that they never knew existed is so beyond gratifying.
And you have worked with some very vulnerable people, and you've worked with people who have lost their homes. You have worked with, in cases involving minors and incapacitated individuals. How can these cases shape the way that lawyers think, both about legal strategy as well as the responsibility that you have to your client involved?
For me, I think the interesting component to this is also advocacy and making sure there's support within the system. Right. So I think a vulnerable client group is I'll go back to the abuse dockets. And, the change in the assembly bills that allowed for revival of statute of limitations didn't just come from people who were victims. It also comes from lawyers who are actively involved in that. And I think as a mass tort firm, you also have to be considerably involved and paying well attention to what's happening in the legislation and also what's happening within the courts across the country. Something that we've seen recently is it may be a verdict or a judge ruling that doesn't bode well for our future, right? So how do we come back and fix that essentially? And that's by advocacy. That's by making sure that this doesn't become precedent. This is by making sure that there are different laws to support us in moving forward and continue with the focus of justice for the people who are the most vulnerable and have no voice here. So for me, that's a big part of it that I like to be involved with. I have a background in policy as well, so it goes hand in hand for me, and it's been nice to see.
Well, and that has to be so rewarding, knowing that you're making a difference, not just for the client that you're immediately working with, but making a long-term difference for those who can be impacted by similar situations down the road. And I think that's a legacy to really be proud of that you're actively building. And so for firms who want to do more of this kind of work, take on more of the complex litigation cases, advocate for people who are really needing that in their lives and making that kind of difference, what kind of resource or mindset shifts are necessary to make those cases possible for them to take on?
A couple things I think are important here, and one is obviously setting yourself up for success. That's the point of the question you just asked, right? And it goes back to those resources, is do you have enough to support that client base? Because for some people, they're doing one-off cases, and maybe they have up to 100 individuals that they're representing, and that's been their norm. Taking on something like mass torts, within the name, you have a mass amount of people, and you need to really make sure that you can provide the service that they deserve. So that for me is number one in pushing forward. I also think we may be a huge country, but the plaintiff's attorneys world is so small, and using that to your advantage is a big key as well, right? We try to know all these people and work with them, and that's also a resource. I think a lot of the mass tort firms aren't always taking on these cases alone. We'll co-represent, and that gives us the ability to focus some staff on one area and other staffs on other, and maybe that's another firm can provide XYZ at a better capacity or has more capacity at the time because we have different cases. So being able to link up within the plaintiff's world is also a great resource in my mind.
Right. There's a lot of competition out there. There's that mindset, but when you can partner up and find allies in different states that you can work alongside, it can be such a powerful network that you're building. And as you said, the plaintiff attorney realm is very small, and that can provide a real challenge for those who need access to legal support as they are going through whatever crisis it is that they're faced with. And so looking at the broader legal system, what do you think needs to change so that access to justice doesn't just depend so heavily on whether a lawyer is willing or able to take a case?
That's a loaded question.
I have to throw in one curveball.
Yeah, you got me on that one. I think there's a lot. One, in general, I think plaintiffs' firms need to be looked at for the benefit that they provide. And they're same with, politics. There's politics between the plaintiffs' firms and the defense firms. And, there's a little bit of throwing under the bus on each side of that. And for instance, in California, there is a lot of talk right now in legislation to kind of push us aside even more, which is unfortunate. So one, I think we need the support of legislation and the advocacy behind that, and understanding that this should be a right in civil cases just as it is criminal, but that goes so far deep within this country that if I'm being honest, it's a long way away from that. So I think we just need to make sure we carry down the road of doing the right thing, of keeping ourselves held accountable too, because, the bad seeds within our industry don't help. And making sure that we find the allies, even though we are competing against each other, so to say, because we're better off together than we are against each other. There are strength in numbers, there always will be, and making sure we stand for the right things as a unit will proceed to allow us to exist in this world without having our ability to help people slowly chipped away. So for me, that's that continued need.
And it's there, and it'll continue to be there. And fortunately, there are attorneys who are willing to stand up and advocate for those who are vulnerable, who are willing to take on some of these more complex cases and even some of the riskier cases because they can have some good rewards to them. So thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. That's going to wrap up this episode of the Personal Injury Marketing Minute. If you want to learn more about Brittnie Panetta and the team over at Matthews & Associates, you can find them online at dmlawfirm.com. And if you're a personal injury firm thinking about growth and how positioning, messaging, and case strategy fit into your marketing approach, you can reach me at lindsey@optimizemyfirm.com. Thank you so much for listening, and be sure to like, subscribe to the show, and leave a review if you you found this episode helpful and insightful, and make sure that you catch us for our next episode. Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.